Hello everyone. Let's start the lesson on how to make suggestions, which is one of the important oral communication skills in English. We will begin by describing the communicative context and purpose for suggesting, and then move on to the strategies. We will check what we have learned at the end. Let's start with the communicative context and purpose. Suggesting is a language function commonly used in conversations, discussions, and meetings to get the hearer to commit to some future actions. Despite with good intentions, suggestions may still make the hearer feel threatened because they have to commit. Now let's move on to the strategies. We will begin with direct or less polite suggestions. The first strategy to make direct suggestions is to use action or performative verbs, including suggest, advise, and recommend. For example, we would say I suggest that you, or I advise you to. The second strategy is using imperative or negative imperative, as shown in the examples. The third strategy is using modal verbs such as should, need, and ought to, as shown in the examples. Finally, we can use conventionalized questions such as how about, what about, and so on to make direct suggestions, as shown in the examples. Remember the direct strategies used for suggesting mentioned above are more direct and less polite. Now let's look at indirect or more polite strategies for making suggestions. The first strategy is using probability modal verbs, including can, could, may, and might, as shown in the examples. Note that using could and might would make the suggestions even more polite. The second strategy is using impersonal expressions, in which the speaker's true intention is not clearly stated, as the example shows. The third strategy is using modifiers with personal opinion, as shown in the example. In this way, we appear to simply share opinions rather than making suggestions, and thus our suggestions may seem less threatening to the hearer. Finally, we could use downtoners, such as perhaps, just, or maybe, to soften the suggestions and make them even more polite, as shown in the examples. But what if we hope to suggest in the most polite way? We could do so by combining indirect strategies as shown in the example. With these 4 indirect strategies combined, our suggestion looks very polite, doesn't it? Now let's practice what we've learned. For practice 1, please read the context and choose the most appropriate strategy to complete the suggestion. It might be better to is best because it is indirect and more polite, which is what we should do with our boss. For practice 2, please rewrite the suggestions to make it more polite with at least 2 indirect strategies. As we can see, there are at least 4 combinations of these indirect strategies to make the suggestion more polite. We can use perhaps you could, or perhaps it might be better to, and so on and so forth. Now let's check what we have learned. Quiz 1. Please check the direct suggestions. The last 2 suggestions are more direct because they use conventionalized question and performative verb. Quiz 2. Please choose the most polite suggestion. The answer is B, because it combines 4 indirect strategies, and usually, the longer the suggestion is, the more polite it gets. Now let's review what we have learned. These are the strategies to make more direct suggestions. It's better not to use them with our boss or other superiors because they are less polite. And these are the strategies to make indirect or more polite suggestions. Note that we can combine them to be even more polite. Thanks for joining us for the lesson. This online course is funded by the Ministry of Education.